school would say, cool, man, this guy wants to do jiu-jitsu, so let's have him sit down. We're gonna lecture him about all the greatest jiu-jitsu players. We're gonna have him memorize the greatest jiu-jitsu players and start to memorize names of techniques. We'll give him some multiple choice tests around that. We'll have him create a trifold board, around that. Extra points if his parents do it for him, and then we're going to have it arbitrarily judged by an authority figure that doesn't know shit about jiu-jitsu, but is there really to, maintain control and compliance over a bunch of kids. So school's going to kind of have all of that kind of go on, versus education, and education is going to say, cool, man, do jiu-jitsu.
Welcome to the Building Men podcast. I'm your host, Dennis Meralda. Hello and welcome to the Building Men podcast. Become the strongest version of yourself mentally, spiritually, emotionally, and physically. Back in the studio today. I'm doing solo today. My brother Anthony is not with us again today, so a couple solo episodes going on today for Building Men. The guest that I have on with me today that you'll be listening to, his name is Matt Beaudreau. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that right. We'll talk about that in a second. But Matt is, to me, one of my bucket list guests. He's someone that I have followed along on his journey over the past couple months. I had a guest on the podcast, and he said, if you don't listen to Matt and Tim Kennedy, and if you don't follow along with what Matt is doing on the Essential 11, you're really missing out. So I started following along with Matt, and we connected a few months back on a Zoom meeting just to shoot the shit for a while. And it's really remarkable what Matt is doing. And after you go through this journey with us on the Building Men podcast today, you'll understand why he is such an important guest for me to have on. There's so many similarities in our views on education, what we should and should not be doing with our students and for our students as we serve them. And just he's a great overall dude. So I wanted to introduce Matt to the Building Men audience. Thanks for being here, Matt. I truly appreciate it, man.
Oh man, honor is mine, and greatly appreciate those words, man. Not sure I'm deserving of it, but it's an honor to be alongside you doing good work, man.
And I have to say, the beard, your beard game is strong, my man. It is a strong look.
Yeah, it's something. It's multicolored and out of control, but it's all right, man. I finally got the go ahead after many years. My wife going, all right, and she actually gave me the best compliment ever the other day. And she's looking back at some old videos, and she's like, you know what? I think I actually like you better with the beard. That's all I ever wanted.
Totally.
So I signed her up for another, however many years she's down.
Yeah, I mean, listen, it's a striking beard, and you mentioned the colors. Once we could get to that point as men where we're like, you know what, the gray, it's a distinguished look. It really is.
That's right. Yeah.
So what's your beard? And I had a beard. It never looked as good as yours. I'll definitely admit that. But I had a beard a couple of years ago, and it was a big beard. And there's a lot of work that's associated with it, as far as keeping up with trimming it and the beard oil and beard butter. So what's your beard routine like?
Yeah, dude, it's really just it's a trimming game. So I was talking about Ian Smith is a buddy of mine, and if you know who he is, his beard's down to the floor. He's got a monster, and he's been trying to get me to grow it out forever, but I gotta just stay with the Leonidas side. So it's a daily trim, man. And then Mike Yarbrough, I gotta give him a shout out over at Wolf and Iron, makes some great beard products, and so been using his stuff. Nick Kulamatzos has some great stuff too over there at Johnny Slick. So I'm down for either of their things and just kind of keep it oiled up, but it's a whole lot of trimming, man. Otherwise it gets all kinds of directions. Looks like it's going to steal children. It gets a little frightening. So.
And listen, throughout this pod, as we go through the podcast today, maybe one of these beard oil companies wants to sponsor the Essential 11 podcast. You know, it could absolutely be one of the things you do. So you do the Essential 11 podcast. That was another thing that I really connected with you, and I'll talk about that in a second, is how you came up with the idea of Essential 11. You run a few Acton Academies, and we'll talk about that today, and then the Apogee program as well. Mm-hmm. There's a part of that. All these things are so fascinating to me. But let's go back a little bit and talk about education, because just our journey into education. I had a conversation with my younger brother, Anthony, over this past weekend. We were just talking about, we're separated by 14 years. So, you know, we were raised with the same parents, but it's just very different the way we kind of were raised. For sure.
Same parents, but different parents.
Different parents, without a doubt. And as we were bullshitting, he was asking me, like, why did you get into teaching in the first place? What was it? Was it you just always knew you wanted to be a teacher? And I thought about it. I said, you know what? It wasn't that. Actually, when I was younger, I grew up in central New Jersey. I was a big Yankees fan, and I wanted to be a broadcaster. I wanted to be like Phil Rizzuto on, Channel 11 in New York, doing the color for Yankee games. And I find it funny that I'm like now sitting in front of a microphone talking to people. But I said why I got into education, believe it or not. I went to school to do marketing, business management, and I started coaching his Little League team. I was 19 years old and he was 5. And we started talking about T-ball and what a shit show T-ball can be. It's a shit show. But I was like, I got into teaching because I loved coaching your team. I really, really loved coaching your team, and I played college baseball, and I was like, you know what, I can teach and coach, and that's the route that I want to go down, is working with students in some capacity. What about you? Why did you get into education in the first place? What was it?
Kind of a funky roundabout sort of deal before I figured out that's where I wanted to go. I'd always enjoyed school as a kid, but I enjoyed it for all the social reasons. I enjoyed it because it allowed me to play sports. I enjoyed it because it allowed me to hang out with my friends and meet girls and, do all that stuff. And I'd figured out the game pretty early on. I got straight A's all through school, and I was an easy thing for me. And I really did look at it as a game. I'm like, okay, how do I get my A doing the least amount of work possible? And figured that out pretty dang young. So, but I'd had a good time. I went to college and was doing the exact same thing. And I wasn't going to college for anything specific. It was to get better at sports and get better at girls and just keep playing the game and just elongate kind of that, that childhood, I guess. Coming out of college, my senior year, I ended up graduating in May of 2002. So my senior year, September 11th, 2001 hits, right? And I'm going, okay, well, maybe there's some direction for me. So I'm going to go into the Secret Service. I don't remember exactly why I thought that would be the route, versus military or whatever, to be honest. But I guess I knew we had one family friend. So that was my entire senior year of college, was that. And I figured, okay, cool, that's what I'm going to do for my career. So I went through the entire background process and was offered a job at the White House, just needed to graduate college. Ended up talking to that Secret Service agent, and he ended up talking me out of it before I actually graduated and moved out. So at that point, I'm going, cool, man, I won't take that job, but I have no idea what to do. Now I have no job. So odd jobs here and there. And by doing a good job at the little jobs that I had, I was eventually getting kind of pulled from one job to another, kind of getting recruited from one job to another. And it landed me at Stanford University. And it was working at Stanford that I really kind of made the decision that I wanted to go into education. I saw the game being played at that level. And when people talk to me about, obviously running schools, people are still worried about college and they want to talk about college. And the one thing I saw very early on is that it's a much more nuanced game than people understand. And it's not necessarily an integrous game all the time. It's not the meritocracy that people think it is. And so I got to see that, firsthand, working on campus, working in admissions, working with a number of the students. I also got to see a number of these students who are all, so much probably more intelligent than I am. But I couldn't see how they were going to succeed for some of them. I couldn't see how, I see this guy with his OChem books or whatever and have the conversation. Obviously super intelligent, but I'm also wondering if he's going to fall down before he gets out of the room, because it's just the incapabilities that I saw for these young guys. So it was just this interesting thing for me. So while I was there, I started going into kind of a corporate training position on campus. And so I got to work with, departments all over campus and students and staff and administration and professors. And I just went, okay, you know what? This game's not super integrous. We've got people here that are super smart, but they're not necessarily showing to be capable. I wonder if I can start to help fix this from the bottom up. I'm kind of digging this whole being in front of people and talking thing. Maybe teaching is what I'm meant to do. Maybe I can start with that younger group and really help them be more capable citizens and more capable individuals versus just academics. And so that was really what kind of spurred it on. So ended up going from Stanford University into the K through 12, public school system, and the rest ends up being history from there. But so it was kind of this weird roundabout way before I realized, okay, that's actually what I kind of want to do and what I'm supposed to do.
Matt, you mentioned the game. You were, you got good at playing the game, and what you started to see at a different level. How would you describe that term?
Yeah, it's a very multifaceted. So the best, people, see most recently the whole Aunt Becky, situation, right? And Aunt Becky goes to jail because she's paying for a kid to, get this position at this university and the college sports and all that stuff. So I think the best story that I can usually use to illustrate it is, as I was working admissions, and a relatively moderate application comes across the desk, and it was something where it wasn't super impressive, and it would have been a no, except for the fact that this young person had a parent who was best friends with a very, very famous individual. And it was like, no, you can't say no to that one, right? And so that's what first drew me on to kind of these no questions lists. And so many of these universities have these lists of families, and these families are relatively, either influential, famous people, they're big donors, they're maybe, judges, they're, any number of backgrounds. But if somebody comes out of this family and applies to these universities, doesn't matter if that person has a 1.7 GPA and just got out of jail for, breaking and entering, welcome to Stanford, welcome to Harvard, welcome to, right? And so you've got that aspect to it. A lot of things are willing to be overlooked if there is a specific need. So, we think of it in terms of sports, right? This school needs a point guard. They're going to recruit the point guard that they want. If they can get the best point guard in the world, well, they're going to overlook a whole lot of other things because they fill a need for that campus, right? Well, that goes all over the place. It's not just sports. What if we need a cello player, if we need more black people, we need less Asian people, we need, you have all of those factors that come in, which starts to deviate from what we think of as this true meritocracy. And then you also have, for some of these quote unquote elite schools, which is a bunch of bullshit, you've got these, rankings that they've got to keep up. And so part of the rankings is to make sure you only accept a certain percentage of people. So it doesn't matter if 12% of your applicants should have the opportunity to come to your school based on the criteria you theoretically set forward. If only, if we go over 5%, then acceptance, then that's going to screw up our rankings, right? So you take all that into effect. So when you start putting in all these different kind of nuanced factors, you start to see there's a whole lot more than just, hey, go to school, get good grades, volunteer a bunch, and doors are going to be open. It's a little bit of a scam in terms of the admission side. So that was just the kind of the tip of the iceberg of the game, and that's a game that penetrates all the way down to K through 12 as well. But the impact is we've got a culture that believes what they believe about school and what they believe about college, and schooling has now become equated with education, and I think those things are diametrically opposed.
Totally agree with that. And when we think about the whole idea of college, growing up, I'm a few years older than you, but growing up, my first year teaching was actually full-time in the classroom. Was my sixth day was September 11th, 2001.
Okay. Wow.
In the classroom. Yep. On the East Coast, having students in my school whose parents commuted to New York City. So that definitely resonated with me there. But growing up, I remember the culture was you had to go to college. Like if you want to be able to be successful in the world, you had to play the game in school. And I did the same thing. I played the game well. You know, I played sports in high school and in the college. I kept up a certain GPA, and then did the same thing in college. I don't know if I necessarily learned anything during my years of college that I'm applying in my life right now that I couldn't have done in another way. So, in your opinion, then, should we be telling students that college is something that they should aspire to be a part of their future? Should that be something that we're telling kids right now?
Yeah, when we tell kids, hey, everybody's got to go to college, it's as arbitrary a goal as saying, hey, everybody's got to complete second grade. Like it's literally that arbitrary. We should be building human beings that can go out and have impactful, fulfilling, purpose-filled lives. Now, if college happens to play a role in that for anybody, great, that's fine. But creating college as a goal that needs to be obtained, or that even painting the picture of college as being something that is, everybody should at least aspire to, is creating a false god and putting something on a pedestal that really shouldn't be on a pedestal. Again, if it's part of your individual journey and you can articulate why it's a good decision in the path to where you want to go, then great. But the reality is most people can't articulate it other than these cultural beliefs and these mythological beliefs around it. Like that's what they'll use to articulate it. They can't really articulate why it's a good step in their journey, because for most people, like you said, there are other paths that a lot of times have a greater ROI. You're coming out of other options, maybe debt free, and you're coming out and you're, the opportunity costs of losing those years that you spent on the college campus. Like there's very few really career paths or life paths that I would say require it at all.
If you're going to be removing my spleen, then I would want to make sure that you went through maybe an advanced degree in some way. But other than that, there's only a few things. To be a teacher, you don't need to go to college, in my opinion.
Well, no, you're actually hindered by it. And so like to go back to your example too, removing the spleen, you know what I would really, really like if I had to have my spleen removed? I'd like to have somebody who comes out of, high school, college, homeschool. I don't really care where they come from. I want them to have hours and hours and hours and hours of deep study on how the human body functions and practice on how to remove a spleen. That doesn't necessarily equate to having to get a degree. Because that person that, has the degree taking out your spleen also had to take, women's 18th century liberal studies or some bullshit, right? They had to pay all of that money. None of that helps them take my spleen out, right? So the whole game of college is theoretically becoming, helping you be well-rounded, is a crock of shit. And so I'd love to see, apprenticeships and kind of old school apprenticeship styles in the medical field. Like that would be great. Like go in, if that's what you want to do, go in and just start doing that. To have to take a class on geology doesn't do anybody any good, except for the universities, because it costs you, a few grand to take that dumbass class that you could care less about.
That is the absolute truth right there. And I read a book called Weapons of Mass Instruction by John Gatto.
So good.
That was a game changer for me, listening, reading that book. And he talks about a student that he had when he was 13 years old. The student was in his class, I guess it was, 7th, 8th grade. And the kid was barely in school. And even when he was in school, he was a pain in the ass. He would get into fights. And finally, Gatto was like, what the hell, man? Like, tell me what's going on. Like, why aren't you here? And when you're here, you're such a pain in the ass. He's like, listen, I don't need this bullshit. I don't need to be reading, the Illustrated Man, in class and discussing it. He's like, or learning whatever other bullshit you're talking to me about. When I'm on Tuesdays, I work with my uncle, and he's a tailor, and I learn how to do that. I work on the farm on Wednesdays. I do this. He's like, I'm basically going, and I'm an apprentice in all these different things, and I'm learning what's the best field for me, and then how am I going to do that when I'm 20 years old or 18 years old or whatever the case may be. He said, so I'll come if you tell me I need to be here for a certain number of days. I'll come and I'll, just go through the motions, but I'm learning so much that I will never learn in school. And at that moment, he's like, I need to change my opinion and my relationship with education. You said schooling and education are not synonymous. Can you expand on that a little bit? And you said they're actually diametrically opposed.
Yeah, for sure, man. So schooling is the system, and John Taylor Gatto was so instrumental in my understanding of all this too, and in my path of leaving, public school and ultimately leaving conventional schooling altogether. And I had a chance to connect with him before he passed a couple of years ago, and he's just a phenomenal individual. So schooling is a game. It's a system, meant to perpetuate an outcome. And the outcome, I think John does a great job of laying it out in his essays, like the 6-lesson school teacher or 7-lesson school teacher or something like that. And he talks about, how the real patterns being infused because of schooling have to do with obedience, and it has to do with, not challenging the status quo and being able to follow directions, but not necessarily think of something better and innovate. And, and that's what schooling is, whereas education is something that is literally continuously ongoing. And, one of the kind of an example. So I've got a TEDx coming up that I'm speaking at next month, and it actually looks like it's going to go virtual. So I'll probably end up doing a virtual thing. And so I want to expand on this a little in that TEDx. But one of the examples that I use to talk about the difference between education and school. So I got a 5-year-old boy. I got 3 kids, 10, 8, and 5. The girls are 10 and 8. My little dude's 5. So he came up to me not too long ago. He's like, Dad, I want to do jiu-jitsu, right? He knows I've done jiu-jitsu. He knows a lot of my friends have done jiu-jitsu. And he's like, Dad, I want to do jiu-jitsu. And I'm like, sweet, man. That's awesome. So school would say, cool, man, this guy wants to do jiu-jitsu. So let's have him sit down. We're gonna lecture him about all the greatest jiu-jitsu players. We're going to have him memorize the greatest jiu-jitsu players and start to memorize names of techniques. We'll give him some multiple choice tests around that. We'll have him create a trifold board, around that. Extra points if his parents do it for him, and then we're going to have it arbitrarily judged by an authority figure that doesn't know shit about jiu-jitsu, but is there really to, maintain control and compliance over a bunch of kids. So school is going to kind of have all of that kind of go on, versus education. And education is going to say, cool, man, do jiu-jitsu, right? Go actually start to roll on the mat and go learn directly from people whose life is jiu-jitsu. Go roll with them because they're masters. They're, they've got their 10,000 hours and usually a lot more in this field. And you're going to learn directly from them by doing it. It's a vast difference. School is perpetuating this system that doesn't actually allow you to really grasp a lot of the things you think you're going to grasp. And it's very narrowly defined anyways, what they want you to grasp. Education, it means you're actually doing it. And then, a whole college would say, cool, that's great. You want to be a jiu-jitsu master, but you're also going to need to pay a shit ton of money to play tennis, and a shit ton of money to swim, and a shit ton of money to play basketball. And theoretically, that's going to make you a better jiu-jitsu player, which is also horseshit, So the whole thing doesn't logically map out in any other area of life.
So you were in the public school education system. You mentioned how you got there through Stanford and you're working there. What was it for you that you, being a part of that system, and I was a part of that system as well. I was, in that machine, which is, education in this country. I was just a part of it. And I was just like, okay, what is the next thing? So I was a teacher. I got my school leadership, my master's degree in educational leadership. So I became an assistant principal, and I'm like, okay, the next step is for me to be a superintendent. So what do I need to do that so I can continue this gigantic barge floating down the river in the wrong direction, pretty much? For you, what was it? How did you get from where you were to now you changed your mindset? Was there a specific moment? Was it just, you started to question shit as it went along?
Yeah, it was a gradual was a kind of a gradual cycle, I guess. I started out teaching in some rough areas of California in the public school system, and I was always what I called creatively insubordinate with what I was doing, and had these young people that I was grateful to serve and to work with. But the reality was they were living in a gangland, and a lot of them, their parents were gangsters, and they would have to go home, and mom and dad are telling them to get out and sling drugs on the porch, and these kids are in middle school, and so they're in a rough sort of upbringing. And so I'm working with them on a day-to-day basis on life and changing their mindset, and trying to paint a future for them and a way out. And what I was told was that it's algebra, and hitting those state standards is what's going to help them. And I wasn't seeing that be the immediate need for so many of these kids, right? And I mean, that's simplifying it, but it was, that was the reality. And so I was brought in, to an office at one point by a superintendent, who was like, "Hey, we're having got a crisis on our hands here. We're not really sure what to do with you. You're, the favorite teacher of all these students. The staff loves working with you, but, you're not exactly staying, true to the curriculum. So your principal doesn't know what to do about that." And kind of a hand slap sort of deal. And so eventually, after a few years, I'm like, "Oh, I'm just going to go into administration, because if I go into administration, then I can affect real change." Right. Some naivete. And so going through to get my administrative credential, you start to realize the game at that level too. So much about politics, so much about union control, so much about money, so much about, again, perpetuating the system. Even when you go get a credential, you're taught to perpetuate a system. You are taught, look, the system looks this way, and here's how you manage the classroom so that everything continues to go this way. Here's the and all of that stuff was not sitting well with me. And as I'm seeing all of that, from the political kind of realm, I'm just going, man, this is really so much less to do with the young people. And I always want to distinguish, like, there are so many good people in education, so many good people who are teachers and administrators. Like, that's not my issue. Of course there's some assholes too, but there's assholes in every, anywhere you go. But there's so many good humans. It's a system that is not designed for human development. And so that's where I started going, okay, well, who's doing, is there anybody that's kind of doing this right? And that's towards the tail end of getting out of public. And I still went to private conventional school afterwards, which ended up being pretty much the exact same thing. But that's when I started at least diving into, some of the Finnish school system kind of modalities, and really kind of how they took a look at human development. And that's when I started taking a look at John Taylor Gatto and Ivan Illich and so many of these pioneers, Maria Montessori, and some of these pioneers that came before us. I started down that rabbit hole at the tail end of public, really went down that rabbit hole while I was in private for about 5 years as well, where I finally at that point had enough and went, cool, I'm going to go make my own thing.
And so we'll get into that, how you created that in a second, but what you just mentioned about the group of students that you were teaching that were going, into school, they were there just to basically for you to babysit them for 7 hours or whatever until they got home. Totally. They really weren't, if you're talking to those students that are going home into a dangerous environment where they're asked to, sell drugs to even help their family pay rent, and you're trying to talk to them about Shakespeare, they're like, fuck you, like, I have no fucking care of that in the world.
Don't care. And if I was honest, most of it I didn't care either.
Exactly. Like you mentioned, the geology thing, so the difference between schooling and education, you've gone to school, you took one class in this specific subject, and now you're going to teach kids to become, jujitsu master based on one class that you took and learned just the way that you're teaching them. It's you also mentioned being in the Stanford admissions department, where if you knew, if you were brothers with a guy who works on this person's car and they're a superstar, they're going to get into school no matter what. Yeah. So there's this haves versus have-nots system that's out there as well, through K through 12, and then, it's more prominent more prevalent when you get beyond. Those kids that you were teaching, do they truly have a chance then? Do those kids really have a chance, or are they just in this cycle of, okay, they're going to continue, they're going to, have kids of their own, and it's going to be the same exact system?
I mean, that's the downside. And what's crazy is that, like, not only do those kids not have a chance, it's the other kids that quote unquote have a chance who are even more ingrained in the system. At least those kids that I was serving would call bullshit.
Yeah.
that initial group, at least they would call bullshit and go, man, this isn't what I need. At least they were speaking it, truthfully. Whereas, later on you get into the more quote unquote, the ones that are less quote unquote underserved. And there's this thought that, no, of course you do exactly what, school says. And then, that's the population that's perpetuating this cycle that really has latched onto this cultural indoctrination, and is honestly making it harder for progress. I live at this point, we're in a very socioeconomically advantaged area of California, and we'll have parents come to our info sessions, our open houses, and I can intellectually walk all of them through their bullshit beliefs around schooling and how that has not necessarily been the factor in whatever level of, quote unquote success or happiness or anything they have here. We can give numerous examples of people that have gone the other direction. I can intellectually walk them through everything, but their emotional attachment to keeping things the way it has always been is so strong. That cognitive dissonance is so strong that for so many of them, it's impossible to break them out.
It's like that book, Who Moved My Cheese? Where just because it's been done a certain way, everyone's just going to continue that because that's all they know. And in schools, basically, we're creating employees. We are creating factory workers. We are creating
not even good ones.
Right, exactly. And basically it has to be turned around, in my opinion. It absolutely, we have to look at it from a different angle. And so that's what you did. You left that machine, and you're like, you know what, I don't believe in this bullshit anymore. So walk us through now. So you, after you leave that and you get towards the Acton Academy, like, what is that? Yeah. What is the transition like for you initially, and then what do you actually do there? Walk us through what that would actually look like.
Yeah, it was the transition was glorious at that point because I was already so far on the other side. I was already there, I was already there mindset wise. And I remember, my second to last show, I mentioned I went to private schooling after public first, but it was private conventional schooling. And I was hoping, okay, well, it's private schools, right? They don't have to play by the rules. So they can, again, naivete, but they mimic public schools for the most part, almost always. So I was there 5 years. My fourth year, at the end of my fourth year, I'm like, okay, I've got to figure out a way to get everybody, the parents, the board of this school. I was in administration, and I'm going, I got to get people on board with understanding what real education looks like. So I developed kind of this project that was very Acton-esque, where there was, generally an outcome ish that I wanted students to get to, but I wasn't going to tell them how to get there. And I was just going to kind of maintain a high standard of expectation of what they were going to kind of produce. And so then we left the students alone, gave them some, essential support, and they ended up coming out with what they ended up saying was the most beneficial project they'd ever taken on, like across the board. The students were saying it, the parents were saying it. I had students that, over the course of a couple months were, some student got a book published and into the hands of every female inmate in the state of California. And another one's got so much money raised and created all these products that they could go out and donate to a number of homeless, people on the streets of Sacramento. Like, they just did amazing things. And at the end, I went to the board and I was like, look, that's what I'm talking about. And they're like, okay, yeah, that was really cool, but it was really risky because, there wasn't an attached rubric. It wasn't very, well-defined. And we want to see what standards it's hitting and all this. And I was like, cool, man. So, hey, just going to give you a heads up right now. I'll finish out next year. But then I'm out. Like, I'm gone. I'm going to have to go, because this was a clear sign to me, like nobody's going to be on board. So we're going to have to go. I had started, I'd been speaking out around education and some of the issues, and ultimately was kind of giving me these little breakout sessions, which was leading to a little bit of keynotes. And I was speaking to a group of professors on the East Coast. One lady told me about Acton Academy. And so that really kind of started my journey. I went out to the original one in Austin, sat down, watched, a group of middle schoolers run 2 hours worth of meetings and work with the adults saying literally nothing the entire time. And I went, dude, this is what I'm talking about. Like, this is it. This is young people taking on massive responsibility, being massively capable. This is it. So the transition for me was a piece of cake. Building it is the hardest thing I've ever done. The mental transition for me was no sweat. So after I left that private school, I took a year to really build out the community before we launched, to bring in the right families, to bring in the right guides. And then, and to really launch that campus, which has now grown into 3 campuses. And the reality is we're going to have to do more.
It made me cringe when you said the curriculum guide and the standards, the state standards, because as a principal, I remember looking at lesson plans. To me it was one of the worst parts of my job, was looking at lesson plans and what I needed to make sure that you were hitting standard 1-1.2 in this lesson. Because why? Because someone on the Board of Education said we need to do this by such and such a time when they created all the curriculum guides. It's absurd. And once you look at it from a different angle, it's like you can't unsee it. Like, once you see it, it's impossible to unsee all the shit that we're doing in schools. And
that's right.
So I also believe too that as a society, we are not honoring and really truly understanding what students are capable, or what kids are capable of doing at a younger age. I think we have this preconceived notion that kids in middle school can't do this, that, or the other. Like, that we kind of put them in this little container, this little box, and like, you need to wait until you're older to do that. I don't feel like we challenge kids enough at a young age to be able to step up and really perform.
Agreed, man. It's we have perpetuated kind of this delayed adulthood that we see in our society. And I think that's a multifaceted problem. I don't just blame school for that, although school is a huge part of it. I think parenting trends are a really big part of it. We have also never been, in a time where there are more opportunities for distraction than there are now. And so that's definitely all of those things play into this. But the reality is exactly what you said. We have essentially lowered the standards for what it means to be a human being. In our Apogee program, the first book that I have those young men read is a book called Do Hard Things. I don't know if you've ever read that book or not, but it was written by 2 brothers who were, I believe, 18 at the time that they wrote it. They had just come off a successful political campaign that they had run for like a state senator in Alabama or something like that. And the whole concept of the book is that young people are so much more wildly capable than we give them credit for. And they give historical references to it, right? They talk about some of the founding fathers, and they talk about Ben Franklin, and they talk about some of these guys who at 12 years old, 13 years old, they're running multiple businesses. At 15, 16, they're, a surveyor living on their own in the wilderness, and they're 13 leading other men into war. And they're 15, 16, and they're married and they're having children. And I'm not saying everybody should do that at a young age. What I'm saying is people are capable of doing that. And the whole, their brain's not fully developed, that's great. That's a cop out and a half, though. That's fine that the brain's not fully developed. They're still more than capable to take on all these responsibilities. And, one of the things the book talks about is the fact that the term teenager wasn't even a thing until the 1940s. Wasn't even a thing. Like, there was no term. We put that term in as this kind of buffer, and then ended up kind of delaying things. And so essentially, culturally, it's just turned into, okay, well, here's a stretch of time where you can just act like a jackass and not have to take on any responsibility, right? Now we believe that students aren't capable. If we're believing as a culture students aren't capable at that age, well, then they're going to believe that as well. But the alternative is we go, no, you're very capable from a young age. You say you're very capable of doing great things, and it's actually going to be required. Like, we're actually going to hold you accountable to that. We believe you are going to be a responsible human being. And if parents would get on board with that and the schools would get on board with that, we'd see this entire thing flipped on its head, because young people would, as they always do, man, rise to the occasion.
The other scary part is that, while the term teenager didn't exist, right now we almost don't have a term for what is going on with young men post teenage years, into their early 20s. And I mentioned my younger brother's 14 years younger than me. He's in this, as a 30-year-old, a lot of, the people that he associates with, his, crew, some of them are, they've grown up recently, but a lot of them were in their late 20s. And it was like they were just in an extended state of adolescence, it seemed like. And I wonder if you were to ask even kids, I should even ask my own kids, like, what age are you an adult? And I wonder what my kids would say. I'm sure it might be 25. It might be 30. Who knows? Man. I got to do a lot of speaking over the last 7-8 years for Fortune 500s around the world. And I worked with a research firm out of Austin, Texas. And so it was this group of PhDs, and all they did was research generations and generational trends. And I remember a big study they did where they asked the millennial generation, what age do you become an adult? They asked them that very question. And they qualified it by saying adult means you don't live at home, you've got to pay your own bills, and you have to have at least a part-time job. At what age do all three of those things happen? And the number one answer overwhelmingly from the millennial generation was 30. Right? And it's asinine to me. Now, it doesn't mean all millennials think that way. It's quite the opposite. There is a group of millennials that are absolutely freaking crushing it. But it means there's this prevailing belief now in society that you're not an adult, that all those things don't happen until so much later than just a generation ago. And it is such a disservice that we are doing to our young people to make them think that they can't take on those kind of responsibilities until they are older, that they don't have the opportunity to do that. It's crushing our culture. And the other thing that's interesting as well, you had mentioned before with the Apogee program. So first I want to give you an opportunity just to explain what that is for people that are listening right now.
Yeah, so the Apogee program. So we got the Acton Academies, or what I think are redefining, kind of K through 12 education in our society and really globally. We're making this global push, but even within that, one of the things that I still see just from a cultural standpoint is a lot of young men who, and I was like, man, am I the old guy that's just going, you wouldn't have survived in my day kind of thing? But I'm just going, man, I just continue to see this like kind of weaker and weaker generation. And I mean that not to slight them, but I mean physically they're, more young men are in worse shape. And that's, my clients are military services all over the world are some of my clients as well. And they're seeing that decline in physical capability, but mental capability too. We've got more young men who are depressed and who feel like they have no purpose and just are emotionally handicapped. And so, and is that happening for women too? Maybe, probably. But I didn't grow up as a young woman. So I grew up as a young man. And so I understand that mindset, obviously, a lot more. So to me, it was like, okay, well, how can I address this specifically as well? So I went to my friend, Tim Kennedy, who a lot of people know, and just said, hey, man, what if we start working on this too? I got Tim, helping Tim open an Acton as well that just launched out there in Cedar Park. But Apogee is specifically for kind of bringing back that old school, like a Gogi, sort of thing, that rite of passage where good men pour into young men to bring them into manhood. And so we've started out with the mentorship program right now, which is a global virtual mentorship program, but we've got a number of other things in the works that we'll be able to kind of throw out there in the next few months too, that I think are going to be pretty spectacular. So it's a good men pouring into these young men.
You talked before, Matt, when you were going through your idea of the game, and you said you were really good at playing the game, and the game was sports and girls and money.
Oh yeah.
And so here's the thing. I read a book called A Season of Life. And I'll send you a copy of this book. It definitely was a game changer for me. And I read it back when I started the Building Men program as a principal in 2005. So I ran a boys' social group. Was open to any boy that was in the school pretty much. They would come before the day started. Our school day started at 8. They would come at 7:15, and we would meet every week, and we would talk about issues that they were facing as students. We really talked about what masculinity means. What does it mean to be a man? We would start every meeting. It would be in a circle. We'd start every meeting. You had to shake hands with every other person in the space. Greet them, and so we taught, and like different life lessons. How do you change a tire? How do you tie a tie? Things like that. But then we would also talk about the importance of understanding what masculinity means. And what we first started to do was break down what society was telling them or what they were hearing. And so what we started with was, you mentioned sports. The first thing that we would do is say, as you're growing up, as you're a young man growing up, a lot of us would define how we show up as a young man or as a man by our athletic capabilities. So we were seen as in a higher status if we were better athletes. So those kids that were good athletes they were a step above. So it was about our athletic ability. Then the next thing that we would think about was our sexual prowess. Like, how many girls can we bang in the shortest amount of time? So it became the notch on the belt thing. And then it was, okay, once we're, out of college, if we were, going to college, it was how much money can we make and accumulate material things. So it was sports, girls, and then it was the money, just the same thing that you mentioned as part of the game. And what we decided was all of those things can be taken away from us. If we base our masculinity on something that is either can be taken away, if you're a great athlete and all of a sudden you break your leg or you have a disease that you're unable to do it, if that's how you base your masculinity on, it could be taken away. If it's about how many girls you bang and all of a sudden you get ED, and if that's how you're basing it, or you lose your job. So we started to talk about, okay, what are we going to base our definition of masculinity around? And let's look internally, something that we cannot take away: our character, our integrity, relationships that we can build with people. So if you were to go back and think about, even through the Apogee program, what are the lessons that our young men need to learn to really define masculinity? What are the lessons, or what are the life things that we need to teach them?
Yeah, it's a great segue to that, because I mean, it really is those intangible, kind of that moral code, and even when you're so like, if you really look back to what you're given the example of, like, we put that value on your athletic ability and your ability to get girls and your ability to make money and all that kind of stuff. All those things can be taken away, but the underlying thing, really, if we look at it, that we're kind of evaluating right there, is competence, right? We are looking at a man's ability to be a competent human being in some way. And from a tribal perspective, it's like, cool, how, we want competent people within our tribe so that we can continue to move life forward. That in of itself is kind of this DNA thing. The outward examples that we gave are, kind of this things that are fluttering in the wind that we can't keep control over, that aren't really the goals, but it's that underlying competence. And my friend Jack Donovan does a much better job of describing kind of the competence within a tribe, specifically in his book, The Way of Men. He does a really good job of lining that up. But so things like that competence, like you said, the integrity of doing the right thing no matter what, that personal responsibility and feeling like you are always personally responsible for yourself, for those around you, right? Like that inherent need to try to control the controllables, and then also be able to kind of mentally be at peace with the things you can't control. It's those kind of that value system, and it's the ability to take all of those kind of traits or virtues or values and to grasp a hold of those and try to internalize those consistently. And that's the biggest, I think that's the biggest key. It's all those values, being able to encompass those, but doing it day in and day out, and doing your best not to balk at those values and to consistently live by those, and not live by those Monday and Tuesday and then say fuck off Wednesday through Sunday. Right. It's literally every single day. To me, that's where masculinity is. It's that responsibility every day. It's that integrity every day. It's the competence every day, taking care of others every day. And Jordan Peterson talks about all the time, making the world a better place by making yourself better. And I think true masculinity is around that. You are being the best possible version of yourself, whether you feel like it or not, every day.
When you talked about Tim Kennedy and the Apogee program as well, you basically, it's such a big part of what we're doing in Building Men is creating a space for conversations that men can have, that hopefully younger men will listen and say, wow, like I can see what's going on here. So and I just had a conversation with a guest about the importance of young men seeing a tribe of men interact with one another. So it's not just do as I say, it's what I do and how I'm showing up. And we need to be really intentional to help the younger generation understand that. So when we think about rites of passage that young men should have to go through, what are some rites of passage that you want your son to experience? I know he's only 5 right now, but like, what are certain things that you would consider to be a rite of passage for him as he grows?
Yeah, I mean, I think the things that make men, we connect very much through our bodies. So I think there are physical rites of passage, and that doesn't mean you have to get beaten up, but I think tying some hardship to physicality for young men is a non-negotiable. Having some responsibility as a young man, having other people that depend on you is really a rite of passage, where we bring you into like, okay, now you are responsible for this, whether you're responsible for a pet, or you're responsible for a job, or you're responsible for a team. You're responsible for kind of this outcome. Being willing to take on hardship and to push through hardship, being willing to take on responsibility, and then being willing to, adopt this mindset of having to become more and more capable over time. I think those are things that we have the ability to pass along to our young men. We have the ability to put these things in front of them, so that they learn to adapt and just kind of incorporate that into their main life and into their everyday life. And I like what you said too about being around all these good men and having these conversations, but needing to put it into action, because what we strive to do with what's a cool part of the Apogee program is we'll give them projects and challenges and workouts and things like that are meant to go through all of those things, right? Kind of the getting comfortable with physical hardship, taking on more and more responsibility and being responsible for somebody else, having to be in a situation where you need to understand how to adapt and how to provide, and being able to protect and being able to communicate, all of these things of becoming capable. So they have all of that they take on, and then every week they're connecting with another good man from all walks of life. And it's cool because they'll go from, Jeff, you mentioned Jeff Hoffman, right? He was the CEO founder of Priceline.com and a business advisor to the White House and to the UN and philanthropist and just this amazing entrepreneur. So they'll chat with him. And then, they have Brian Callen, right? Who's a comedian and an actor. And
Tremendous.
Then they'll go over to, Ian Smith, and they'll go over to Zuby, who's a musician, and then Mike Glover, special forces guy, and then Leif Babin, and we got Dean Cain coming on, right? Like Superman. And like, there's so many guys from so many different walks of life that have done so many different things, but the common thread are those things that we mentioned before. They're good guys who want to take on responsibility, who are fine pushing through hardship, who, have had examples of how they've had to become capable guys. And so the cool thing is, no matter how different these guys are, their patterns of success and the things they hold valuable to themselves, as far as like, here's my integrity around being a man, they all end up looking pretty much the same. And that's the beauty of it.
The other interesting thing is of the people that you had mentioned, and as I listened to Essential 11, your podcast, we'll get into that too in a second, but a lot of these men have gone through that challenging spot where there was either the fork in the road or they found themselves at a low point and they needed to pick themselves up, to rebuild, to do something to go through that. And I think to bring it back to experiences in school, we don't allow kids to go through hardships. We don't allow kids to fail and grow from that failure because it's an opportunity to learn something about themselves and what they're actually capable of. Parents, for such a long time, you probably saw this yourself as an administrator, parents want to come in and solve problems for kids, and I'm saying, you're doing them such a disservice. Let them fucking suck at something. Let them like fall down and realize they're strong and capable. They can do that for themselves.
Yep. Let them fall down. Let them lose. Let them lose. Like, set them up. Let them fail early. Let them fail forward. And failing now when they're young and having them figure out how to get around that, how to pick themselves back up, how to change course, how to get better. Having them do that now when the consequences are almost nil. It's a small cry. It's a small disappointment. It's a whatever. Like, that is a different experience than learning it when you're 30 and it's a loss of a job, or it's the breakup of a marriage, or it is, being a shitty parent. And you've got to learn these lessons when other people suffer and the consequences are so much greater, right? Let them learn those lessons now so that they can be stronger adults. We do a huge disservice to our young people, and school is a huge perpetuator of that. You're absolutely right. We don't let them have those experiences.
When I made the decision to leave education, one of the books that was really important to me was Tribe of Mentors. And when I found your podcast, your basically your introductory episode was Tribe of Mentors. Like, you wanted to you talked about being Michael Jordan, that was, you wanted to be Jordan. Like, so what did you have to do? And Tribe of Mentors, as I did the audiobook and I took a million notes around lessons learned from that book. And it resonated with me because it was really important in my journey. And then I find you have a podcast. It's kind of based around the ideas in that book. So talk to us a little bit about Tribe of Mentors and how that worked into you deciding to start the Essential 11 podcast.
Yeah, I mean, like you, man, I read that book and took so many notes. I've been a fan of Tim Ferriss and his work for so long. And the biggest thing I like about him is his perpetual curiosity. I think that's one of the biggest things I respect about him, is that he's not I've got all the answers guy. It's I've got all the questions guy. And that makes you a much, more rich individual to be around. And so that Tribe of Mentors was, kind of his take on, all right, I've got all these questions and let's just go to a bunch of people that are doing some really cool things and kind of get their answers. And even though the questions are pretty much the same, the answers are so different, and there's so much to take away from that. And my favorite part about working with young people, young heroes, is that they still got a lot of that curiosity there, and I've gotten to work with, again, Fortune 500s around the world. I've gotten to work with 350 of them. And it's been great. But the problem with adults is that so many adults feel like they've already got all the answers, or they just have to have the answers, right? They get rid of that curiosity. And I love working with the young people. So the podcast, since it was going to be intertwined with everything we're doing with Acton too, I wanted to do kind of the Tribe of Mentors thing. I wanted to go to young people and just go, cool, man, what are some of your questions? Like, what do you want to ask some of the greatest athletes and entrepreneurs and actors and musicians, and like, what do you want to ask all these people, and kind of get their answers on. And so we kind of cultivated those top questions and have done exactly that, gone to some of these just super stellar human beings, and just kind of get their stories and get their takes on it. Again, I want people to hear that. I want young people to hear all the stories are different, but those patterns of success end up looking, very much the same. And, they might hear it from one person and go, okay, well, that was kind of cool. And then somebody else says it pretty much the same thing, but in a different way, and they really resonate
Yep.
with that person, then it clicks, you know? And so that's really kind of the premise to the whole thing.
Is there a question or two that the young men have given you to ask to someone that have really stuck out to you?
Yeah, my favorites by far are what do you want to see from a young person if they say they really want to come work for you, work with you? By far, one of the most interesting questions, because all the answers have been vastly different, but these are some of the most successful, oftentimes some of the most successful people on the planet. I mean, we have so many guys, Beaudreau Schoolian and Patrick Bet-David and Seth Godin and, again, Jeff Hawk. I mean, you got some people that are running these multi-million and multi-billion-dollar company, Gary Vaynerchuk, right? Like, you got so many of these people, and not freaking one guest has ever been like, oh, I got to see that college degree. Like, not one has said that at all, period, end of story. So I think that's always, I think that would be telling if, I'd had 10 guests and they'd never said it, but we've had 120 or so and none of them have said it. So that one is always, I love that question. The other one is kind of where, understanding where people are maybe counterculture. And so the question is something along the lines of, what is one thing that is a piece of common knowledge that everybody knows is true, but you say, oh, that's complete horseshit. And I think that is such an interesting question. It's the one that gives them, the most pause, but they come back with some very interesting things. It's kind of cool to see where, and that those answers are literally all over the board, man. But where they go, hey, here's a piece of common knowledge. Everybody says this, or everybody always says this, and I think that's total bullshit. I say this, I think that's always just an interesting insight into their mentalities. Probably my favorite.
What would your answer to that question be?
That last one, the counterculture part.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
Jesus, dude, I can go so many places with that. Obviously, school is one of those. I always say you don't find education in school. I don't think you find God at church, and I don't think you find health at a hospital. I think when you have systems set up, it actually takes you pretty far away from what you think you're there to try to find. So I think that is probably the most. Those are the ones that are most relevant in my day-to-day life, because I fully believe all three of those things. I don't think you find education in most schools. I don't think you'll find God in most churches, and I don't think you find health in most hospitals at all. But there's a bunch of common adages too. The whole like work-life balance thing, I think, is a crock of shit. I think balance just comes in between your ears. I think that's it. It's that peace of mind. So I think when people are trying to extrapolate that into something else, I think that's an individual thing. I outwork almost everybody on this planet, but I don't do so in a way that's stressful to me. I also don't do so in a way that the relationships that matter suffer. I still have time with my wife. I still have time with my kids. And the work that I do, I love doing it. So the whole work-life balance, well, to me, they're the same thing, and I'm at peace in my head. That's where the balance is. So I think that's another place that I'm pretty counterculture, but that's something that could go on for a long time.
Yep. Yeah, it's interesting. And with men, especially the work-life balance thing, I hadn't thought about it in that way before. It's something that I felt as a principal, I was constantly struggling to find a balance. And I think it's because I wasn't where I needed to be. So if that's something that you're telling yourself you need to find work-life balance, there's something that's not harmonious in your mind, because it shouldn't feel that way. And that's the way I feel now with what I'm doing. Is I just feel like this is life. This is my life, and I will find ways to honor every piece of that. I don't need to, it doesn't need to be a seesaw in the center.
That's exactly right, man. Could not agree more.
So, Matt, how can the Building Men audience find you? How can we reach out to you, follow along on your journey?
Few places you can go, man. You can always obviously listen to the Essential 11 is always appreciated. But check out what we're doing at Acton Academy. So the ones I own are Acton Academy Placer, Placer, but you can go to actonacademy.org and check out Acton's movement kind of across the globe. Can check out apogeestrong.com is what we're doing for the young men. And then I'm most active on probably Instagram, just my name, Matt Beaudreau, but you can check out Apogee Program on IG as well. But any and all those places, man, if people reach out, I'm always glad to get back. I'm always just tell people to give me a day or two sometimes, but I always try to get back to everybody I can.
One of my favorite posts that you put up recently is just you saying no over and over and over again, and then the questions are below in the comments. That one really fucking cracked me up. That was a good one. So
dude, yeah,
absolutely.
And I definitely got some pushback from that, which is fine. But yeah, it was especially all around the all of the craziness that's going on for our young people and how much they're being taken advantage of in schools right now with all the COVID shit going on. So it's crazy.
And when you're getting the pushback, I think that means you're onto something. It's bristling up against people for a reason, and it's changing people's opinions on things. It's amazing. So what I'll do is I'll put all that information in the show notes, ways that you can connect with Matt, with the Acton Academy, with the Apogee program, and we'll release this episode to where the TEDx talk will be right around the corner, so we'll be able to promote that as well. Awesome. For Building Men, find us on Instagram, building.men, buildingmencoach@gmail.com. I wanted to thank our guest today, Matt Beaudreau. We truly appreciated this journey we've gone on. Definitely a learning experience for me and definitely for the Building Men audience. Go a step further than you thought you can go. We'll see you next time on Building Men.